Welcome to another episode of TBR 0. I am very much a mood reader, and so the books that I am going to be reading today are based entirely off of what I feel like reading. Maybe in the future I'll be able to organise some TBRs and set some reading, but right now this is how I like to read, and I hope you enjoy it too. I should give you some figures, shouldn't I? We've entered today's video with a total of 434 books to be read on my shelves and on my Kindle, or 290 physical books and 144 ebooks and 148 non-fiction books. So let's see how we get on. First book read for this vlog is Alias Grace by Margaret Atwood. Now, I've watched myself talk about this book in another video and I kept calling it Alias Grace, and I don't know why I was calling it that, because what word even is Alias? Where did I hear that? Is that how you say it? I don't think so. I think this is Alias Grace because alias is a word. Anyway, this is really masterful. Margaret Atwood is doing so much in this. It is weaving together so many different things. However, it is a big chunky book, and I think similar to how I felt about The Secret History, I think the pacing will lose some readers a bit because it does feel like it gets quite slow in the middle. However, I can see what those slow bits are doing. I know that they are building up this idea of what is the truth. How can we trust people's memories of what's happening? Let me explain what, because I think you need to know what Alias Grace is about. So this is historical fiction, but it is about a real case, the murderess or the convicted murderer Grace Marks in the 1800s in Canada. Now, her and a man called James McDermott were convicted of killing Mr. Kinnear and Nancy Montgomery and then running away. They were caught, they were imprisoned, they were both sentenced to death, but Grace Marks, no one could ever quite determine whether she was guilty or not, what part she played in it, whether she was just as guilty as James McDermott in the actual murders, whether she was an accomplice, or whether she was sort of forced into running away with him, even though, you know, she was terrified. Nobody really knows, and nobody survives who can really say. So Atwood has crafted this story about a possible answer to this story, and it's really well done, and all the way through we're sort of flitting between real accounts, so letters, court documents, people who say they've met her, the confessions of Grace Marks herself and James McDermott, and then we're splitting between the perspective of Grace Marks and this psychoanalyst who has come to sort of determine whether he can work out whether she's guilty or not. Gosh, it's really difficult to talk about this concisely and succinctly. So we're looking at, is she guilty or is she not? When she is telling her story to this psychoanalyst, is she just trying to cast herself in the best light possible? Is she misremembering facts? Is she embellishing things just because this is what she thinks this guy wants to hear? She wants someone to spend time with. She's lonely. Is she just embellishing the story so that he stays with her and he's engaged? She picks up on his body language, whether he's engaged in her story or not, and then is she changing it to make him engaged? And then equally we're getting his perspective as well, and sometimes the things that he's thinking are quite dark and villainous, but yet he rationalizes his own thought processes and his own evil intentions with saying, oh, but I'm sane. I know I'm sane. I know that this is not a rational thought that I'm having right now. So there's a difference in gendered understanding of what is sanity and what is insanity. And there is also as well a class distinction in here as well, because the sorts of things that are happening to Grace Marks, where it sounds like she is being taken over by another personality, within the upper classes, women are starting to experiment with things like seances and having spirits talk to them. If Grace Marks was suggesting that she was talking to spirits, she'd be thrown into the asylum and treated poorly because she was considered insane, whereas these women, it's a hobby. So it's doing that. We also then split different sections of this book up into types of quilt work and weaving and textile history, which is adding in this other layer because textiles are so important to Grace at this time. And throughout the story, different items of clothing or different things like bed sheets, the bed sheet that she wrapped her mother in when she died as a death shroud, all become important throughout the story. So it is doing a lot. That is why it's so long. But I do think that for some readers, this might suffer with pacing issues. I decided to give it 4 stars out of 5 because I think it's masterful. I think Margaret Atwood is such an amazing writer, but I do think that for general enjoyment, if you like the sound of this as a historical novel, I would really recommend The Mad Women's Ball by Victoria Mass and translated by Frank Wynne. It's much shorter. It does a lot of the same things that this is doing, but this is doing a lot more as well. So they're very similar, but this, I think, if you just want a really engaging, good story, this one. The other thing I think about Alias Grace is if you've read any other Margaret Atwood, you can really see the sorts of things that she's preoccupied with. I've read The Handmaid's Tale, so very much feminist politics, very present in here. And then the Penelope ad I've read as well. I didn't really like the Penelope ad, but it is doing very similar things. She she is taking a woman from history or potentially myth, fiction, and then giving them a voice and giving them a reason for what's happened. So yeah, you can really see all that happening in here. As we're here and it is a bloomin' miserable day outside, I'm going to tell you about the next book I'm reading. I've nearly finished it. I will finish it today. This is Heartburn by Nora Ephron. I'm so disappointed in this book. I read the first chapter and I was so convinced that this was going to be my favourite book of 2025. I was like, the tone is so funny. The scene setting is brilliant. Nora Ephron is a film director. She has, I mean, I haven't watched any of her movies, but all the famous ones. Oh, sorry, not director. She's the screenplay. When Harry Met Sally, Sleepless in Seattle, like all these famous ones. I'm afraid I'm not big on movies, but I know they're big ones. I know they're very famous. So you can really see that in her writing style. It's really funny, quite dark in terms of the humour, like it's dark humour. But the first chapter was so unbelievably brilliant. It is about a woman who is 7 months pregnant. She is a cookery writer, hence all the cutlery on the page. And at 7 months pregnant, she finds out that her husband is in love with another woman. And we're sort of following her as she tries to separate from him, but also reflecting back on different aspects of their relationship throughout the different chapters. And what's interesting about this is that it's semi-autobiographical. So this is something that actually happened to Nora Ephron. And she says in the introduction, I always thought this would make a good comedy. It's very difficult to think about the tough times that you've been through, but she thought to herself, this will make a funny story. It does make a funny story, but in chapter 2, she starts to use derogatory language towards different groups of people. And I don't know how I feel about that. She is making light of it, she is making little jokes, but they are at the expense of other people, of other groups, of people who have historically always been treated poorly. Now, the main character in this is Jewish, and she also makes fun of Jewish people, and I don't know if Nora Ephron herself is Jewish, but I would suspect so, based on how it's talked about. So it feels like one of those things where it's like, I make fun of myself and I make fun of everyone, and that's the humour, which I know was very prevalent, especially even when I was growing up. This was written before I was born, but it is, you know, that was the humour growing up, and that's here. But I also just feel like I felt quite disappointed. She seems to really fixate on people who suffer with dwarfism, and I don't like that. But equally, even with that, I don't think the rest of the chapters have lived up to that first chapter. That first chapter was so good, and then the rest of them have just felt a bit like they're just trying to keep up with that and they're not quite managing it. So I'm really gutted, because I really thought this was going to be the best book I read all year. And I talked about it to so many people as well. I was like, I'm reading a really amazing book, and then it's... Anyway, so that's 2 books read, another 2 off my TBR. Oh my gosh, I don't even know where I am. I'll work out the number and I will put it here because I don't even know where I am in my countdown. Woo! Okay, I've got a little update for you. For this one, I am actually going to get rid of 3 books off of my TBR. I don't normally unhaul books that I haven't read yet, but I was thinking about reading one of these books. These are all Christina Dalcher. I've got 2 physical and Vox on my Kindle, all from secondhand shops, although absolutely pristine. Maybe other people had the same feelings that I did about this. I decided I was going to read one of these to decide if I wanted to keep all 3, and I was looking on Goodreads for which one has the highest rating. It is Q, also known, I think, in America as, something about education. It has a different name on Goodreads. But as I was looking through the reviews, some really interesting comments came up about these being very anti-feminist, a bit turf. There are certain weird comments about race thrown in, and basically everything that I was reading about these books and this author just made me think, do you know what, I don't think I want to read their work. I purchased all of these when I was going through very much a dystopia phase, because I love The Handmaid's Tale, I love Brave New World, I love things like Leave the World Behind by Rumaan Alam. Like, I love those weird but also very poignant dystopia and apocalyptic novels, and so I went through a phase of like collecting them on Kindle and in physical copy. But I think it's one of those genres, a bit like romance, a bit like thriller, where the quality varies dramatically. You can get some absolutely amazing things, and then you can get some really rubbish stuff. So one of the other comments that was made in the reviews is that Vox is her first novel, and then these 2 are almost exact retellings, plot points, everything is almost exact retellings. So it's kind of like just regurgitated rubbish, and I really don't feel like I want to read these now, so I'm going to be getting rid of them. So that's 3 books off of my TBR, 2 from my physical, 1 from ebook. Yeah, so that's a few more down. Right, I did finish Heartburn, and yes, I think I would say something like a 3.5 stars. There are some really good sections in this, some great chapters, but then it's interspersed with stuff that just wasn't quite as good as I was hoping. So yeah, really fun, makes light of a situation which Nora Ephron herself went through in terms of infidelity. The dialogue is brilliant. It's quite absurd. It feels like an over-exaggerated way that people would react to what was happening, but that's really fun about it. But as I say, I have some misgivings about it in terms of the way it portrays certain people. But really interesting to read that and then immediately go in to read The Department of Speculation, because this follows a very similar storyline in terms of a woman experiencing the infidelity of her husband after having children, and this is so well done. It is very experimental in terms of its style of writing. It is not like your classic novel. It is written in almost fragmentary thought processes. Like pretty much each sentence is its own section on a page. And so if anyone were going to be reading this, I would encourage you to sit down and try and read as much of it in one go as possible. Maybe over 2 sittings, maybe 3, but don't try and read it here and there. When I first started reading this, I read the first chapter, and then after that I was trying to pick it up when I had a little moment to read some, say when my son was having his hair cut at the barber's. You need your full attention on this, because a lot of what is happening between the lines. You aren't necessarily told everything that happens, but you pick up what's happened through the feelings and emotions of the character that you're following. We also change perspective, so at the beginning it seems that she's directly addressing her husband, and then as they move further and further apart, she starts to talk about him in the third person and address us as the listener. She then starts to talk about herself in the third person as she distances herself from what is happening to her, and then eventually we come back round and she moves back into addressing us as the reader again. It's really well done, but you have to be concentrating to read it. Even though it's a short book, it is not one that is an easy read. It's you definitely have to immerse yourself in what's happening, but I think this is brilliant. I think I would give this 5 stars. Absolutely amazing, absolutely incredible. I don't really know what else to say about it. So what have I had during this reading vlog? I've had a 4-star read with Alias Grace, a 3.5 star with Heartburn by Nora Ephron, and then a 5-star with Department of Speculation by Jenny Ofhill. Absolutely brilliant. So what am I reading next? Whoop. So my upcoming books, I'm currently partway through, nearly halfway through, Mr. Fox by Helen Oyeyemi. I was hoping this was going to be a fairly straightforward narrative. After reading The Department of Speculation, that's so fragmentary that I really wanted just like a straightforward story. And I thought I was going to get this with this, but this is kind of like interconnected short stories, but not. You couldn't read them on their own. There are certain sections you could read standalone, but it's like lots of different stories that come together to make a narrative, but they're all quite disparate, so it's not one story that you're following through. So not quite what I was expecting, but we'll see how it goes. I'm also about to do a buddy read with a friend who I've done a buddy read with before, and we're going to read Milkman by Anna Burns. This was the winner of the 2018 Booker Prize, so I'm looking forward to getting into that one. And then I decided that after how emotionally raw this book is, and yet it didn't make me cry, it didn't make me well up, I really wanted to have my emotions obliterated. I don't know why, but I really want something to really cut me deep, and I have heard that A Little Life is one of those books that will make you do that, and I have that on Kindle. I've had that for quite a while. I think I probably bought that when I very first started watching BookTube videos, so I have started that tentatively, but obviously knowing that I'm reading Mr. Fox and I should be reading Milkman very soon. So I'll let you know how that goes. Thanks for watching.